The Secrets of Star Trek is brought to you by the Star Quest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give. You're listening to The Secrets of Star Trek, episode number 47.
Captain to bridge.
Spock here.
Make it so. Surrender is not an option.
Attention crew of the Enterprise, this is James Kirk.
We are all explorers, driven to know what's over the horizon, what's beyond our own shores.
We would have helped you get home if you had asked. That's who Starfleet is.
Hi, I'm Dom Bettinelli, and you're listening to The Secrets of Star Trek, where we discuss the hidden layers and deeper meanings found in all the Star Trek TV series, movies, and more. And today we're discussing, okay, now follow this, folks, the first 3 episodes of the second season of Deep Space Nine.
Today we're discussing the first episode and a half of the second season of Deep Space Nine.
Right, so the fans generally call it the Bajoran Coup Arc, which is it's just 3 episodes long. And we've split this into 2 episodes of Secrets of Star Trek. So.
And this was the first time that Star Trek had done a 3-parter.
Yes, and we'll get more into that in a bit. But of course,
now that we've completely confused you with all the numbers involved in these episodes,
who are these guys?
Yeah, who are these guys who are talking at me? Joining me today on the panel are Jimmy Aiken. Hi, Jimmy.
Howdy, Dom.
And Father Corey Stika. Hi, Father Corey.
How's it going?
And to remind folks, remember to like Secrets of Star Trek on Facebook, retweet the show on Twitter, leave us comments to comment on the show. Subscribe in iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, TuneIn, your favorite podcast app, or YouTube. Hit the bell on YouTube to make sure you get notifications when we post there. And, of course, share the podcast with all your Trekkie friends and even the Trekkers, too. Help us grow the community and reach more listeners. So we're talking about the second season of Deep Space Nine. We've previously talked about the series premiere of the first season. Now we're in the second season. It's September 26, 1993 is when this broadcast for the first time, and we've got the first 3-parter in Star Trek history.
Well, one thing that was kind of interesting to me was this didn't start out from a cliffhanger from the end of the season.
Yes,
right. That season 1 was a closed off season. Once season 1 ended, there was nothing there's no cliffhanger.
Right,
like a lot of later seasons have, and of course DS9 or TNG used quite regularly as well.
Even Voyager did too. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they had guaranteed renewals for the most part, and so they could do that more safely.
Right. I mean, you could almost say that, like, the way that they've done Discovery with a continuous storyline, it's just the way a lot of streaming shows are done nowadays. But back then, this was a relatively novel approach. Not everyone in the Star Trek production agreed with it. Some folks felt like they were padding it to reach 3 episodes. That maybe it should have just been 2 parts. So they eventually decided to make it 3 episodes and kind of throw it out.
And it did not feel padded to me.
No, I was going to say the same thing. I mean, we've watched some Doctor Who episodes that have been very obviously padded to make up a 2-parter, and this was this was probably the quickest 3 episodes I have watched in a long time, where it was constantly moving. There was constantly stuff going. They're constantly moving the plot along. There wasn't a lot of filler at all, in my opinion.
Yes, yeah. This is true. And in fact, the first part starts to set things up, but it almost stands alone a little bit. The first episode is called The Homecoming, and it surrounds the story of
it's about a big football game.
Yes, the homecoming game.
Cisco is switched from baseball to football, and so
right, exactly. So we have this Bajoran resistance hero, Lee Nallis, that everyone thought was dead. He turns up alive in a Cardassian prisoner camp and is rescued, and that's really the theme of that first episode. The second and third episode, well, Lee Nallis, I'm going to make that mistake several times, is a part of those episodes. He's
not the focus.
He's not the focus. Way. Yeah. So there's really 2 different things, and it becomes very much more, as my wife put it when she watched this with me, there's a lot more politics in this, and of course DS9 had a lot more politics than the rest of Star Trek anyway. Although later TNG brought in some Klingon politics, but DS9 really took it to the next level.
And I'm glad they did that in this, because they've been talking the whole first season about how the Bajoran provisional government is shaky. But we've never seen evidence of it being shaky until now. And so in essence, in the first episode, Lee Nollis is the focus, but they also begin building awareness of this Bajoran nativist group called the Circle that is going to attempt a coup in the next two parts. And then Lee Nollis at the end becomes key to resolving that plot line. So he kind of fades a little bit, but this is his, focus episode. And then the Circle will come to prominence and challenge the provisional government.
Well, and this is one of the things that makes DS9 perhaps my favorite series, is that there's a world building going on, that, we don't just have, okay, the Bajorans are now free and everything's okay, and now we're going to have adventures. That there's highs and lows, there's problems in the background, even most of the time, not even necessarily in the foreground like it is here, but there's a background, and you see over time the Bajorans progress toward, from freedom, new freedom, to a stable society and a stable government. And then we get the Dominion War, and then we see development and progress, and things change, and there's consequences that bear out over arcs of episodes. I mean, we talk about this as the first three-parter, but this whole series, as we've said before, feels like a more modern series where there's a long arc of the story that we get. And this is the first season doesn't play that way as much, but this is where it really starts to feel like that the rest of DS9.
No, the first season has those horrible standalone episodes, like the Dalrog episode with the storyteller, and Miles O'Brien has to be really pretentious.
Oh, and the Run Along Home. Oh
yeah. Third shop.
I cannot wait till we discuss that one. So let's
count three more.
So let's talk about. So we have a great guest cast in this one. We have some really great actors.
That purple-haired Boslick freighter captain. Wow.
Well,
she appears in. She actually comes back in several more episodes later on.
She does. Well, although
so she's the character who starts the plot rolling, because we've got Quark in his bar. Odo detains him with just some business. Quark says we're going to be friends from now on, which they play with later in this episode and this arc. But then he's really anxious to get up to the holosuites where he's supposed to meet this Boslick freighter captain, who gives him an earring, Bajoran earring that she does not know the significance of. And since she can't take it to Bajor this trip, she gives it to him. And that's what starts the plot rolling, because it turns out this is instantly recognizable to a Bajoran as the earring of Lee Nollis, their greatest hero from the Cardassian Resistance.
So that raises a question for me: are Bajoran earrings, because all Bajorans have an earring? It's very decorative, and you're familiar with it. Are they distinctive and individual?
See, that's kind of what I think they were getting at. And I think this was the first time they kind of mentioned that each earring is a personal crest, if not like a family crest, that there are symbols on it that are individual to the person, so that if you see it, it's not just decoration, that every Bajoran wears a decorative item. It's like a tartan for a kilt.
Yes.
It's recognizable.
Yeah, I think it's somewhat in the middle of those, because it's not just this was an earring from Lee Nollis's clan. This was Lee Nollis's. So I think I mean, you could say, well, he was just super famous and everyone knew his earring. But the way I took it was, it's kind of like that knife they have in an episode, the Klingon knife they have in an episode of Next Generation, where it's like, see, this part of it indicates it's from this family, but this part of it indicates it's from the future, from a guy who's only just been conceived.
Okay. Right. Okay. Interesting. Yes.
Like a family, a family crest, or a person takes a family crest and makes their own personal crest.
Yeah.
Off of
based on that.
So this moment where we have Odo and Quark it's really an inconsequential discussion that doesn't have anything to do with the rest of the episode, except there is that moment where Odo says, every once in a while Quark says, every once in a while declare peace. It confuses the hell out of your enemy. which is
76 rule of acquisition.
Yeah, that was weird. And then we have another nice moment where we have Sisko and Jake on the promenade, and we have again this great father-son dynamic that I really enjoy.
It was so great, and I really loved the interaction between the two of them. It shows how Sisko is a good father. He's encouraging Jake in his growth, to start dating, but he's also setting limits. It's like, no hollow suites, no going back to quarters. How about sitting on the promenade and watching the spaceships go into the wormhole? and I love Jake's response. He says, I can see you're not ready to have this conversation yet. To his dad.
and Sisko he's just stunned. It's like, what? I'm not ready to have this. Wait a minute here.
He totally turns the tables on his dad. That's a good one.
That's where, again, talk about the beginning where there's not a lot of filler. This seems like this is a filler scene, just kind of to bring the characters in, but it does set up the plot for later. This does get revisited later. Because it's a Bajoran girl.
Yes. And even when we shift to the next scene where he's talking to Kira, who now has the earring and wants a runabout, Sisko is still bouncy and happy talking to Kira. And this is what I like Avery Brooks to be. I mean, I know he needs to be dramatic at times, but I like seeing him happy and bouncy and playful. He does that great. And unfortunately, as his character arc progresses, that gets thinner and thinner. I know you guys are huge fans of Sisko as like your favorite Star Trek captain. I don't really have a favorite Star Trek captain, but for me, it would not be Avery Brooks because he's so serious so much of the time. If he were like this more of the time, he would maybe be my favorite.
I think it's because of the arc through the war, and it shows how the war wears on him. But we don't have to get into too much of that. But one of the things I like about this, when Kira shows up, she's very business, I got to get this very important thing. And he makes her wait a second. Sure, just a sec, Colonel or Major at this point. He finishes his conversation with his son. He doesn't just push him off. And that's a very nice moment. So Kira she's got the earring. It says that Lee Nallis is alive and in a Cardassian camp.
Yeah. Oh, and by the way, she notes that she had Dax run a DNA analysis on some cells they found on the back of the earring, and it matched Lee Nallis. And so this is 1993. This is today we wouldn't blink about you could do that. But for 1993, that's quite forward thinking. DNA testing was just starting to come in. It was an exhaustive process. And out here in California in the 90s, there was a shift that, I don't know, may have influenced the writing of this episode because it's obviously made out here in California. But they actually changed the laws in California in the 90s regarding DNA collection and retention because they had been just throwing away criminal evidence that they didn't realize would have DNA on it. But there is a famous murderer now known as the Golden State Killer who they had some DNA from, and there was a lobbying movement to start retaining that DNA. And so in case he could be caught in the future. And recently he was caught when a family member put their DNA in an online database it nailed the Golden State Killer. We now know who he is. So, but this was something that was kind of bubbling in California in the 90s was all this, how can we use DNA stuff? And so I was very forward thinking of them to include that in this episode.
So let's talk a bit about the state of Bajor at the start of the second season. So at the end of the first season, Kai Opaka, who is the head of the Bajoran religion, their pope, essentially, she's gone.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
The provisional, and she was very pro-Federation, pro-Sisko. The provisional government is, as according to Kira, made up of political opportunists. This is a government that formed in the wake of the Cardassians leaving to kind of set up a new government, sort of what happened in the United States at the end of the War of Independence. And we had the Articles of Confederation and Continental Congress, and then they set up a permanent government.
Well, the Articles of Confederation was meant to be that, but it didn't work.
Of course, yes. And then the planet's population is divided. There's a lot of factionalism. There's some rioting.
Well, yeah, we're told there are religious riots throughout the Southern Islands since the loss of the Kai. So, wow.
Right. And which means the Vedic Assembly, which is essentially like their bishops, have to elect a new Kai.
And they're taking a huge long time. The Kaiopaka hasn't been here for ages. What's the holdup, guys? You got super long conclaves?
Exactly. I mean, which is right out of Catholic history. We had similar circumstances where they would go for years without electing a pope.
And the cardinals would be sitting there arguing and fighting, and they had the political intrigue and all this kind of stuff, just like we see on Bajor.
And that's actually how we got the conclave, because the the cardinals were taking too long to elect a new pope. And so they were locked in by the populace and given a bread and water diet until they did their job.
Which is the meaning of the word conclave, right?
To lock with a key. Yeah.
So Bajorans, just take a lesson from us. Lock them in a room until they come out with one. Although, as long as it's not Kai Wynn, just don't elect her.
She did okay in the end. She was sharp elbowed, but she came out okay.
Yeah. Well, we'll talk more about Kai Wynn throughout these 3 episodes. That's for sure. And then Kira believes that Lee Nallis's return could fix all of these problems as the legendary leader who returns to save them. He's like essentially a Bajoran version of George Washington.
Yeah.
Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
At least in the popular consensus. So Kira wants to take this Starfleet runabout and engage in an action that could be considered an act of war with Cardassia, which I would say would create a diplomatic incident between Cardassia and the Federation, because she's in a Starfleet ship.
But they address that because, Sisko says he takes counsel from Dax first, and her response is, well, what are they going to say? Because they've said they've released all of their prisoners. So they're not going to complain about, wait, you liberated a prisoner that we said didn't exist.
But only if she succeeds. If they get destroyed or stopped beforehand. Yeah. So there is still some risk there. So we have the Circle, who's apparently taking spray paint, because spray paint exists in Bajor in the 24th century.
Yeah.
And spray painting parts of the station with their symbol. They are a Bajoran extremists who oppose all non-Bajorans and want everyone else expelled from the system, which again is a nice touch because it's sort of realistic given their experience with Cardassians.
Well, and even Kira did not want, and they allude to this later on, but at the beginning of the series, Kira did not want the Federation there. She wanted Bajor to stand on its own, and so that's what the Circle wants too. And they even play on the fact that Kira has not been a fan of the Federation, but she's gained enough respect for it now that she's not going along with these new terrorist plans. Incidentally, so also the Circle, once they get going, they brand Quark on the forehead as a symbol of whatever. And this was a source of significant behind-the-scenes consternation, because from the beginning, there had been concerns that Deep Space Nine was plagiarizing Babylon 5, because Joe Straczynski had gone, before Deep Space Nine, had gone to the same production company and pitched Deep Space Nine. And then you have this Deep Space Nine series show up with it's set on a space station. It's led by a commander, not a captain. It's got a wormhole right next to it that lets you to travel to distant lands. All these similarities. And then in this and then in the first season of Babylon 5, we have an Earth nativist group that then brands the bald D'Lin on the forehead. And here we have a Bajoran nativist group branding the bald Quark on the forehead. And so there was a lot of controversy about that, although it seems from the production schedule, and Straczynski has said that he thinks that the creators of the show were not aware of Babylon 5, but the network executives may have influenced them in this direction.
Kind of done hey, I've got a great idea. Why don't you do a Star Trek series set on a space station? That'd be great.
With a commander and a wormhole. And then based on the production schedule of the 2 seasons that were kind of airing contemporaneously, it looks like they had the idea for the Circle and the branding independently. But it's fed into the narrative of what's going on here. And then, of course, both series end up being about giant space wars where empires rise and fall.
Well, and in fact, this story was pitched by Jerry Taylor, who had written several Next Gen episodes, to the producers of Next Gen, but they felt it would better suit Deep Space Nine. So the original story focused on a Bajoran woman who's picked up by the Enterprise on a mission to rescue a leader of the Bajoran resistance. Then she would discover that the leader didn't want to be a leader anymore and had become fed up with leading, and so on and so forth. And then we saw how it got changed. And so it when it became Deep Space Nine, it was altered from a reluctant hero to a mistaken one, based upon the 1962 John Ford movie, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, which is an interesting parallel.
Right. So just to spell that out for people who don't know that movie, it turns out Lee Nollis, the facts of what happened to him have been blown all out of proportion. He defended himself against a guy who was sort of semi-helpless anyway, and it got transformed into this, he's the greatest guy ever military leader, when in fact he was not.
Yeah, so he's the mistaken hero who feels unworthy of the sacrifices of others, that make them on his behalf, or of the image that they hold for him. I mean, so there's this interesting story that develops behind him. Kira and O'Brien, Sisko sends O'Brien with her. They go to this Cardassian prisoner camp to rescue them. Jimmy, I can't hear you. Sorry.
Get through the force field or surrounding the prisoner of war camp. They do this routine where Kira is playing a prostitute and O'Brien is playing her pimp.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, wow.
Well, this same scenario plays out several times throughout Deep Space Nine's history, especially with Gul Dukat and some of the time travel episodes where they go back in time.
Bajoran comfort women and stuff.
Yeah, so but it's definitely a product of its time. So it turns out that Lee Nollis wasn't the one who had arranged to get his earring out, but one of the other prisoners. And the runabout can only beam people in pairs.
Right.
So they have to go down on the surface, and then they have to rescue all of them, and 4 of them stay behind to give them a head start. And I'm sitting there going, so why don't you just beam them back up in pairs? Like, once you get going.
Well, I think there's the force field which they can't beam through.
Well, they weren't in the force field anymore.
Oh, okay.
They had gotten outside the wire, so to speak.
But it can, as we see in the later episode here, it can only beam 2 people until they need to beam 6.
Exactly. I was going to bring that up in the siege, I think it was.
Yeah. It's kind of like in Alien, the Nostromo has a life raft that won't take everybody. So
right, which
that's planning.
Sounds like
ahead.
poor planning.
Yeah. I did think though it was a very dramatic moment where, and you could headcanon this as well. They couldn't, because they had to really race home quick in order to evade security that was now going to be on them. So they couldn't be beaming people up in that situation. But they have this very dramatic moment, which is very character revealing, where Kira's goal is to get Lee Nollis back at all costs, and she wants to save other people if she can, and she's waiting for other people to come to the shuttle, and O'Brien tells her, if we're going to go, it has to be now or we will never leave. And she says, go. And she leaves people on the planet as prisoners of war in order to achieve her overarching goal of saving Lee Nollis. And that's a very dramatic moment. It's very character revealing. I thought it was very effective.
And of course, it turns out okay for those guys left behind because
they all get released.
Right. When they get back, Dukat is on the phone, so to speak, and apologizing about the quote unquote, air quotes, I'm making air quotes, overlooked prisoners.
Yeah.
Boy, I hate that when the bureaucracy misses a whole bunch of prisoners of war that they weren't supposed to have and they swore they'd already gotten rid of. I hate when that happens.
And they've been keeping them alive this whole time in this prison camp. Now, which raises a question that they don't address, which is, who were these people and why were they keeping them? Why didn't they just release them? I mean, I could understand keeping Lee Nollis if he's the great war hero. Were these all great war heroes? If they were, why don't they talk about that?
It would make sense, because if they were all in the same prison camp, if they release those guys, they'll go back and go, but Cardassians still have Lee Nollis.
Oh, well, you could always arrange that problem to be taken care of when you release the others.
Yeah, why don't they just kill Lee Nollis? If they're
it could be like the movie The Great Escape, where there was the one camp that everybody who, and this is actual historical aspect of World War II, there was the one camp that those who were well skilled at escaping would end up in because it was the more difficult camp to escape from. And that could be what this would, I mean, this is kind of headcanon admittedly at this point, but it could be something like that.
I love that strategy. These are the guys who are the most inclined to escape. So let's all put them together and see how that works out.
Exactly. It worked just great, didn't it?
Yeah. So again, let's talk about the guest casting here. So Lee Nollis is played by Richard Beymer, who you may know as You may know him from such movies as West Side Story, where he played Tony in 1961. We also have Frank Langella playing Minister Jaro Essa. I always love Frank Langella. He's great in everything. You may know him from Skeletor.
Yeah, he is. He's really good in this, and he is not credited. If you watch the credits, he's not credited for playing over all 3 episodes because he did this as a favor to his daughters who were fans of the show.
That's funny.
And so,
Interesting. So I was going to say, you may know Frank Langella's voice if you're of a certain age as Skeletor from He-Man.
But he's one of those actors. He's one of those actors who just shows up everywhere. I mean, you look at his list, and it's just a who's who of stuff that he's involved in. He's a very,
he's a guy who works. Let's put it that way. Yeah. So he shows up, and so Lee Nollis is on the station. He's getting all kinds of attention, and the politician shows up, and it basically says to him, you can't blame a politician for wanting to talk to the crowd, and he wants to co-opt, Lee's. His fame, what everyone loves. So we start to get a little foreshadowing of Jaro S's his personality here.
I thought there was an interesting parallel because as it becomes clear that Lee Nollis is a reluctant leader, and we don't yet know the full story on him, that his legend is overinflated like crazy, but we do get the sense that he's a reluctant leader. And there's an interesting parallel there to Sisko, who is also very much a reluctant leader that is not comfortable with the role the Bajorans want him to play. And Lee Nollis is kind of in that situation, too.
That's true. Yeah, Sisko doesn't really want to be the emissary.
Right.
And that actually plays out in a later episode, which is really good, where he realizes maybe it's not so bad. So we have this branding of Quark where the Circle has attacked him. We have that wonderful moment where he's paying Rom, 1 for you and 6 for me. And Rom complains. Yep. And Rom complains and says, "Oh, you're right. 1 for you, 7 for me."
That's much more fair.
That's much more fair. So Quark gets branded, and there's this moment that's uncomfortable where Quark says he's going to sue the provisional government, and he's very upset. And Sisko barks at him, "Not now, Quark." I mean, this poor guy just got branded. That seems a bit insensitive toward a victim who's expressing his pain and suffering in a way appropriate to his species.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of anti-Ferengianism in Star Trek.
Well, we saw that at the first episode of Voyager where, the poor ensign Harry Kim is being, inconsiderate.
Yes. Who is it specifically at the Academy who told you to watch out for Ferengi? Yeah. The one thing I like about this is we don't get a heavy-handed morality play about racism and xenophobia.
But it does turn up because Jake's date cancels on him, and because her father doesn't want his daughter dating a non-Bajoran.
So we get the story without them having to bang us over the head about the parallel to American history, that sort of thing.
It's nice to have the issue raised and dealt with in a way that we don't have to have endless sermonizing about it.
Exactly. Which even Deep Space Nine does veer into that later on, but at this point, not so much.
Right.
And then Kira, when she went off to rescue Lee Nollis, she figured there would be consequences for her actions, and we start to see them now, where she is replaced. She's given a reward.
Oh, yes.
Quote unquote. She's promoted, but without a specific posting, and is replaced as liaison to the Federation on Deep Space Nine by Lee Nollis.
Mm-hmm. And in both cases, we have a phenomenon. I forget the exact Italian phrase for it. In Italian, it's to promote, to remove. In English, it's promotion to oblivion. And that's what's happening to both of them, because the Minister Jaro wants Lee Nollis off Bajor, so he can't interfere. He can't become the leader that Kira wants him to be. And so he gets promoted up to Deep Space Nine. The only position that's suitable for him there would be the Bajoran liaison. That means Kira has to leave her position, so she gets promoted to an even greater oblivion. She has no assignment.
She gets a desk job somewhere eventually, maybe.
Yeah, but they don't even give it to her immediately. She spends all this time in a monastery.
And they give Leah this title, the Navarch, which is a new title for a Bajoran religious leader, which is he's outside the command structure of the Bajoran militia, so he doesn't get to give orders to people, and he's expected to report directly to the prophets. we'll see how that works out. Whether the prophets actually
Care.
accept his reports.
Yeah.
The interesting is Navarch is a Greek word meaning leader of ships, and in Greek, an admiral is Navarchos.
Incidentally, Lee Nallis, and we kind of skipped over this a little bit, but one aspect of Lee Nallis's reluctance to embrace his new role is he actually stows away on a ship that's going to the Gamma Quadrant, and he plans to stay there permanently, from what he implies. And he gets caught, and the aliens are like, "We found this stowaway, Captain Sisko. What do you want us to do with him?" And that's really a dramatic move, to run away that quickly, that dramatically, away from your home planet, never see anyone ever again. It's like he's reimposing exile in a Cardassian camp on himself.
Yeah, this is when he reveals to Sisko what really happened in his story, with how everyone has mistaken him as this great hero and leader. What he did was he accidentally killed this Cardassian gull in this embarrassing moment. And Sisko keeps his secret, because Sisko knows that Lee is important to solving Bajor's problems. Him as a symbol,
right?
And that it's good for the Federation to have him as a symbol,
which is a nice thing for Sisko. It's character revealing for him. He's a little Minister Jaro himself on the other side,
right? But he basically tells him to suck it up and do what's good for Bajor, which is kind of what Sisko's already doing when he's sucked it up as in his role as emissary, whether elected or not. And so Minister Jaro is the one who's sort of maneuvers all this, and that's how we end this episode on this sort of cliffhanger of what's going to happen to Kira. And so we start with the next episode, The Circle. So the first one's The Homecoming. This one is The Circle. And Sisko is now, opens up, he's upset at having Kira dismissed. And Jaro is like a typical politician. "I think you'd be grateful to me that we took her. It's common knowledge you don't like her." No.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, how is this common knowledge? And Sisko basically calls him a windbag to his face, like literally calls him a windbag, which is that's making an enemy of this important politician.
I like he also, makes the point. He is really kind of smooth as a politician. He says, "Well, the Federation doesn't consult us in the promotion of its officers." And that kind of knocks Sisko back on his heels, A, because it's true, and B, because it's implying Kira's getting a promotion, and he doesn't know it's to Oblivion, so he's like, he wants to be supportive of Kira and getting a promotion.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah, but as a commander in his XO, usually the custom would be he'd at least be consulted, and he wasn't. But that's because of the uniqueness of the situation. That's just the way it is. And of course, Jaro wants, like you said, Lee on DS9, where he can be a symbol, but far enough away not to threaten his political power. And then this whole episode, not a little episode, this whole little beat of the story ends with Sisko getting a call from Jake.
Yeah.
"Dad, you should come to the quarters."
And so earlier I praised DS9 for being forward thinking. Now I've got a minor criticism for being backward thinking, because today, what's happened is the Circle has tagged Jake and his dad's front door with spray paint. And today you wouldn't call Dad on the phone and say, "You've got to come home and see this. I'm not going to tell you what it is until you get here."
Exactly.
You would take a picture of it with your phone and text it to your dad and say, "Look what just happened."
Well,
or even just tell him.
Or just tell him, yeah.
Where's the camera, though, on the communicators? I don't remember seeing a camera phone on the communicators.
Well,
I'm kidding.
There's a sensor that's pointed at the door. I mean, yeah. There's a false drama that they often do in a lot of these shows, not just Deep Space Nine or even just Star Trek, where it's like, you must come to this place right now. What is it? Just come and see.
You'll see when you get here.
Just tell me what it is. Yeah, just tell me. So I know. There's no reason not to tell me.
And there's not only on the dramatic level is there no reason not to tell them. On the cinematic level, there's no reason not to tell them, because you don't have to show them being told. You just have to show someone's talking into their phone. They say, "What is it?" Cut to the person having come to witness it for themselves.
Exactly.
Right. You could save yourself some screen time even.
Now, one thing I wish they would have kind of mentioned explicitly in this is you would figure that on station like DS9 that you could only go to someone's quarters, like, say, the commander of the station, with permission. You know, it's not like anybody could just walk down that corridor just because they happen to go for a walk around the station. You would assume there's some security there somewhere that,
like, the station crew would have a segregated area that's guarded.
Well, at the very
right.
You know, I mean, I guess I think of when I was in the Air Force, it's not like I could just walk up to the wing commander's house.
They
if you
guards.
did that, you know, there would be consequences, shall we say?
Yes, that's a good point. That is a good point. So then we come to this scene, which is my favorite scene of I think of at least of this episode.
Oh yeah.
Which is so Odo, it starts with Odo confronting Kira and being angry at her for sort of just surrendering.
Yeah. Meanwhile, she is angry packing in her quarters.
Yes, she's angry packing is a good way to put it. He said, and he tells her, you ignore whatever rules you think are in the way of your personal code. And it's true. Like, she's like, I'm just following the rules. You never follow the rules if you think they're wrong. And then uses reverse psychology on her. You did, what he says to her, well, they're talking about like how they got along well. You did fairly well once I smoothed out your rough edges, he says to her. And then she's like, my rough edges? I smoothed out your rough edges. And so this repartee.
And this is setting up, I don't think they were aware of it at the time, but this is setting up the romance between Kira and Odo later on.
Yes. And then we have this whole scene with Bashir, Odo, Dax, O'Brien, Quark, and Kira, and all this crosstalk, which is so well done.
It is Marx Brothers. It is like a scene out of the Marx Brothers. We have Kira and Odo going at it, and then Jadzia comes in, and now she's talking, and Bashir comes in, and he's talking, then O'Brien, then Quark, and finally Bareil comes in, and that's the thing that puts a damper on the whole thing. But until then, it's just this escalating Marx Brothers angry crosstalk scene, which is awesome.
So the writer, Peter Allen Fields, said that this scene was inspired by a scene in the 1935 film A Night at the Opera starring the Marx Brothers, and that the director, Corey Allen, shot the scene in one continuous uninterrupted take. Now, when it was edited together, it was intercut with close-ups and reverse angles, but the master shot of the scene was one long take, which is pretty awesome.
I wish they would release that. That would be so awesome to see the whole episode, that whole scene from one. And maybe it's on the, I don't have like the DVDs. Maybe that's an extra or something. But wouldn't that be cool to see that just from one camera angle, the whole scene playing out?
That would have been great, because I enjoyed the back and forth, the confusion. Bashir, like, wait, what are you talking about? Not you, her, and like the back and forth.
And of course, just coming
so
ready
well
to set up a party, and
Yeah. This is just such an awesome scene. You don't get to see that kind of scene very often on Star Trek.
Yes, that's true. And then Bareil arrives, and he's Vedek, and we this is our second encounter with Bareil.
Yeah, and he is such a dead fish. I mean, no wonder he's the wet blanket that brings all this to a screeching halt. I found myself asking, why was Kira ever attracted to him? No wonder they killed him off.
Okay, I mean, he is so lacking in emotion and passion whenever you see him.
Are we sure he wasn't a Vulcan?
Yeah.
So he invites her to stay at his monastery, and let's just say, apparently Bajoran Vedeks aren't celibate.
Right. Obviously not.
That's pretty clearly. But so we saw him in the first season's episode In the Hands of the Prophets, where Orthodox Bajorans object to secular teachings about the wormhole in the station school run by Keiko O'Brien, and that causes tensions between the Bajorans and the Starfleet crew, and that's where we get Wynn first time, Vedek Wynn at the time, and Bareil. They represent the different poles of the tension, and so he's showing back up again. Apparently, he was attracted to her from the first, and so now he hears about her displacement from the role, and is going to invite her to come to stay at the monastery, sort of like as a vacation / retreat.
As a retreat, basically.
I want to bring up one thing here that the writers have talked about in retrospect, which is the scene where Kira departs from Ops is, and she talks to Lee Nallis.
And before we get to that part, she has this long, slow kind of silent saying goodbye to Ops, where she walks through it, and then Lee Nallis shows up.
And the writers talked about how like some of them felt like this was his last consequential moment in these 3 episodes, that his story arc just sort of goes nowhere from here. I mean, he has some moments, and eventually
until he heroically dies.
Right. Yep. And it's sort of like we don't progress beyond the mistaken hero, reluctant hero bit. We get to preserve his his story and he becomes a martyr, but that's really it. And they kind of just kill him off.
Mm-hmm. I mean, we see a little bit of fighting, and we'll talk about in the next episodes of Secrets of Star Trek, but we will see, he kind of takes up the resistance fighter mantle again. Yes.
And so he kind of comes alive in that. It's something he knows, but one of the problems is they'd gotten this fairly well-known actor. I mean, he wasn't an A-lister by any means, but they weren't sure they could get him back for the future. And if you have Lee Nalla sticking around, he's got to show up. And so they realize we got to kill him off. And so they kill him off, and then they bring in Kira's next boyfriend, who becomes first minister. It was Shakar.
Shakar, yeah.
And so he ends up sort of becoming the Lee Nalla's character later on. The resistance hero who becomes the leader of Bajor and becomes a romantic interest for Kira. But it felt like, I don't know. Do you guys feel like that the character development just kind of got lost? Or was there something?
There's so much going on in these episodes. I didn't feel it was a problem. I mean, he continues to be the kind of reluctant, but I'm sucking it up. I'm doing what Bajor needs. He does do things like and we won't talk about this till the next episode, but like when the Bajoran officials, military, get to the station after the Federation's supposed to have evacuated. He's like there, he's doing his job and all that stuff.
We shift here, and there's a shift in time. I mean, there's a clear shift in time where we now are at the monastery. Kira has been there for some period of time. We're not quite sure.
And she is so not suited to it. Yeah.
They have her making, she's doing what's obviously meditative labor of some sort, where she's trying to build a walkway through a stream or something. Yeah. And she's clearly a type A person in a type B location. Put it that way.
Well, I love that interaction between her and Bareil, because he's like, I just feel useless. And he says, it might be interesting to explore useless for a while.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And that's
well, it's a good spiritual, as Catholics, we understand the need for something, we think work is important, as we talked about in a episode of Secrets of Doctor Who a while back, but we also believe that resting is important, and that taking time to just, be.
And for a well-rounded personality, you need to throw it into reverse every so often. Even Jesus took time to be alone and pray.
Exactly. And we can't just keep go. We have to stop and listen.
Yeah. Incidentally, I really liked in this scene where Kira makes a confession to Bareil that she has, because he's like suggests she try pottery or something. And she says, I have absolutely no artistic skills, which is hilarious in light of future episodes, because down the line, there's an episode called Accession, where a Bajoran comes out of the wormhole from 200 years in the past, who Sisko thinks may be the real emissary. And so he's like going to bring everyone back to the way society was 200 years ago. And that means he's going to reintroduce the Bajoran caste system or Dajaras, as they have, return them to their Dajaras, as they call their castes. And it turns out Kira's caste makes her an artist.
It's just hilarious. Yeah.
Yes, that did not turn out well either.
Yeah. Also, and then when she has her orb experience in this episode and it's all over and she doesn't want to tell Bareil what she saw, it's like, definitely woodcrafts.
So that's worth bringing up next. So he takes her to have her first orb experience, and orb experience has become a little more mundane a little later. I mean, Sisko has more of them. She has more of them. But at this point, it's still a very new and unique thing.
It's basically like getting to go to Sister Lucia from Fatima and have her get a vision just for you. And this would be a very rare thing not many people get.
Very, very much like we would consider a mystical experience in the church. This miraculous vision
And she says, all my life I've dreamed of this. And then Bareilles' last, when she said, I don't know what to do, his last bit of advice, as we mentioned, was be useless, Nerys, as he says to her. And then, so she has this orb experience, and she sees some things that we'll see, that sort of flashes of things that will happen later in this episode and then the next episode. But then there's one like where she's suddenly naked, and then suddenly Bareil is naked, and I'm like, man, I think I had weird dreams like that in high school.
Yeah, no kidding.
Like showing up to class naked.
Yeah.
It's a little bit of like the insecurity dreams or something. I don't know what the prophets
are saying. That is a foreshadowing for later in the season, and
yes,
but by the way, this is speaking of such dreams. I mean, we have had. It's normal for people to have that kind of dream. I have very frequently. I don't remember the last time it happened, but in my adult life, decades after I left college, I would continue to have dreams where it's like I'm in college, it's the end of the semester, and I suddenly realize there's a class I haven't shown up for, and it's time for the final. And yes. and this just happens. And it's like, why does my subconscious, and I know other people have those too, and it's like, why does our subconsciouses fixate on college in that way? What is it about that time of life? Is it so stressful? And what did people dream about before going to college was normal? Did you dream it was like it's time for the harvest and you forgot to plant the crops, or what?
Yeah. Well,
I wouldn't be surprised if that was.
I actually wouldn't be surprised if farmers to this day have that kind of dream. I'll have to ask some of my parishioners. And I've had the same kind of dream at seminary where I'm standing in front of the classroom door. It's the first day of classes. I know I have to go to class. I just don't know what class, what room, what time, So same kind of thing.
I've had the high school one where I'm back in high school, and I have that anxiety about where I'm supposed to be in the test I'm supposed to be taking and wandering all over. So the vision ends just as Bareil and Kira are about to kiss, and then we are back to the station, and we have Odo and
recruiting Quark,
deputizing him, basically against his will. It's like, you're either going to jail or you're going to work for me. What do you choose? It's like an episode of The Wire.
Yeah, you're either going to be a prisoner or a deputy. Well, then, I'm a deputy. Which is a great line.
I'm proud of that.
Yes. And we got a key plot point, which is that the Circle isn't just a bunch of hooligans, spray painting stuff, that they're actually arming themselves. They're an army. They're going to have a coup, and that they're getting their weapons from these aliens called the Krasari, which Odo says that doesn't make any sense. They're botanic DNA traders, which is interesting. I'm not sure what that is.
They trade botanic DNA.
Thank you for clearing that up for me. And then Quark is the one who found this out. So Quark is actually very important to this. We get, let's see, where we go from here, back to the monastery garden. This is a little bit in ops. We go back to the monastery garden where we had that scene where Kira and Bareil are walking, discussing the aftermath of the vision, which she's clearly uncomfortable with the way it turned out.
She is not just uncomfortable. She is lying her face off about what happened. It's like, man, if I had an intense revelation I was not comfortable with, it's like, I'm sorry, I can't talk about it. I would not be lying about what the gods just revealed to me.
You can tell that Bareil was apparently had a vision with her that he was hoping was reciprocated.
Yeah. And it was, but she doesn't want to tell him.
That's kind of uncomfortable a little bit there. Like, he went to the station to invite her because he had a romantic, let's call it romantic vision of Kira.
Yeah,
exactly.
That's a little uncomfortable.
I can only assume that this is the only thing that ever attracted Kira to Bareil was that this orb thing, that she thought it was the will of the gods for her to maybe mate with this guy.
Yes, let's that's probably all your worst relationships come from orb experience. Don't do that. It's just swipe left on the orb. And then or right, I don't know. I don't know how Tinder works. I'm too old.
Don't use it. Just don't go there.
Don't go there. So they hear gunfire in the distance that Kira recognizes as gunfire. Frankly, I can't imagine any Bajoran who doesn't recognize the sound of gunfire. Given their history,
at least that age, at least.
So the coup is now underway.
Right, and just at this opportune moment, they run into Wynn.
Vedic Wynn
who
at this
happens
point
to be there. How pleasant to come upon such a flowing exchange of spiritual harmony, she says. Is there anything she says that is not a passive-aggressive jab?
I know. Like, she is awesome.
Every single line.
Incidentally, she establishes in that dialogue, she establishes a couple of interesting things. One of them is apparently the Vedic assembly has a formality of you need to consult with the whole assembly before you let someone have an orb experience. So that's how rare they are. It's like you got to talk to the College of Cardinals before you let someone into the secret archive or whatever.
But then Bareil says that's a formality.
Yeah, so he says that's never been strictly enforced. So there are exceptions to that. But it's an indicator of just how rare this is. And it explains or sheds light on something we learn way down the line, which is Wynn has never had an orb experience. And so
although she implies that she did, she kind of says, well, I always make sure they know first.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I consult with the assembly in advance.
Yeah.
As a courtesy.
Oh, I took that as if I'm letting someone else have it,
but she leaves it open-ended though. She doesn't specifically state that she's never had one.
But later she's explicit about the fact that she feels wronged that the gods have she's never given her a vision. And so that's, in hindsight, that's sheds some light on this episode, obviously unintended by the writers at the time, but she's now jealous of Kira for Kira having had this experience. And then we get the great passive-aggressive stinger at the end of the second act break, where she's inviting Kira to stay at the monastery. It says, feel free to stay as many days as you like. Even a week if necessary.
Don't get comfortable. You ain't staying.
Yeah. Well, even before that, she says, a worthy endeavor for someone who's led such a life of violence, child.
Oh, yeah.
She's always calling Kira child, too.
But I love just the way the sentence gets more and more nasty as she goes, you feel free to stay as many. So feel free to stay. That's all she really needed to say if she was being nice. As many days as you like, and now we're putting a time limit on it, even a week, further limit, if necessary, further limit. It just keeps turning that screw.
Yes, that is a masterful line there. So that's a good place for us to finish our stay for this first half of our discussion of the Bajoran Coup Arc. We've got basically 1.5 episodes through. We've talked about the homecoming and half of the circle. Next week, we're going to talk about the second half. But if you have anything you want to say on what we've talked about so far, any comments on it, you could write to us now or wait till we've talked about both. But go to the sqpn.com/trek or the SQPN Facebook page and leave us some feedback on today's episode or next week's episode, or send us an email to trek@sqpn.com. You can find links relevant to our discussion on our show notes on sqpn.com. And like we said, we'll be back next time. We'll be discussing the second half of this 3 episodes. Until then, Father Corey Stika, thank you for joining me and sharing the secrets of Star Trek.
Glad to be here as always, and thank you, Dom.
And Jimmy Aiken, thank you as well.
Live long and prosper.
And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to the Secrets of Star Trek on StarQuest. And remember, be useless.